Hey guys, Dissident Magic here, and I'm back with another video in the series of common MTG mistakes that I constantly see players making. If you watch this entire series, I guarantee you will be a better player. Now, although this is sort of a continuation of how to play MTG better, which was one of my most popular series, not every one of these will actually tell you how to play better. Some of them are just quite simply things that people do wrong. Although if you stop violating the rules of the game, I guess you could consider that playing better. So this video's topic is all about getting the mana cost correct, and this is really important because it's kind of complicated, but kind of not. Like, once you get it, you get it. It's not that complicated. Whenever I'm teaching somebody how to play, this does eventually come up if the game's, the current standard mechanics reference this. The question is, what is the actual mana cost of a given card when it's a card, as opposed to when it's on the stack? Because those are two completely different things in quite a lot of cases. I guess the best way to explain this would be to just start giving examples. Now let's take the card Endless One. As a card, its mana cost is 0, because X is always considered to be 0 until it's actually cast. So as a card in your library, or as a card in your hand, it's 0. So if they have a spell that says, oh, force your opponent to discard a spell that costs 3 or less, okay, it's 0. It's not some magical made-up infinite number. I've heard all kinds of explanations. No, it's 0. Now let's say you cast it. Here's what actually happens when you cast Endless One. First, you declare the value for X, then you attempt to pay for it, then the spell goes on the stack, then the other player can respond to it. So before you even start tapping your mana, you have to say, okay, X is this. This is the amount that X is. This is the value I'm picking. Okay, now cast it. And it's kind of like part of casting. You wouldn't pull it in your hand and say, yes, X is 5, and then 5 turns later be like, oh no, I said X was 5. No, it's part of the casting. It's just the first thing you do before you even sort of start casting it, or I guess right when you start casting it. So usually, just to be absolutely proper, because I use a spell that's stupidly complicated with X and multi-kicker, and it's just a nightmare, I say, okay, I'm casting this spell, I'm choosing 4 as a value for X, then I tap my lands to pay for it, then I reveal to them what the spell is by putting it on the stack. Now, a great example of this is Void Winnower. It says your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs, and then it says in parentheses, 0 is even. So they throw one out and you want to kill it with an Endless One because you've got 20 mana available. I kid you not, this is how it works. You cannot cast Endless One for 20. You could cast it for 19, you can't cast it for 18, you could cast it for 17, and so on. Because as soon as you throw it onto the stack with a given value of X, the converted mana cost becomes whatever you stated it to be. So if you pumped 6 mana into it and said, yes, X is 6, then you're casting a 6 mana spell. I mean, because that's how much you fed into the spell after you determine the value yourself. Now, one more important thing is modifiers. First, there's the pseudo modifiers, and I call them that because they don't actually modify the cost of the spell. And let's use my old friend Judge's Familiar as an example because I love that card. It says, sacrifice Judge's Familiar, counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 1. So what they usually say is, ha, I'm making your spell cost 1 more. No, you're not. You're countering the spell and holding it hostage, like on the stack sort of, unless they pay 1, and then you won't counter it. So you're not doing anything to the cost of the spell. The cost of the spell is the cost of the spell. So for the universally reprinted type of spell, like Syncopate, I mean, there's 5 other versions of it, like Logic Knot, etc. You're really just holding the spell hostage, and then they have to pay their way out of it. It's not doing anything to the cost, even though it kind of looks like it is. They, when they cast their spell, paid the cost, and now it's on the stack, and that's that. It's been established. Now I have to talk about actual cost modifiers, like we'll say Vryn Wingmare, because it's actually in standard right now. It's a flying 2/1, love it, only costs 3, totally not worth it though. Non-creature spells cost 1 colorless more to cast. Now obviously that covers your spells and your opponent's spells, but only the non-creature ones. So you'd think, okay, you're increasing the mana cost. Well, you literally are increasing the cost of the spell, the actual mana cost, but because of the rules of the game, and this is complicated why they did this, but the short explanation is because of Modern, the actual ruling says word for word, this ability affects what you pay to cast each non-creature spell, its total cost, but it doesn't change that spell's mana cost or converted mana cost. So you're changing the required payment, but the actual mana cost or converted mana cost of the spell or the card does not change. So if you want to buy a coconut for a video on your other channel making fun of Pokemon Go, and the coconut costs $2, but then you have a coupon that says 50 cents off, that doesn't make it a $1.50 coconut. It's still a $2 coconut. I'm not even going to explain why that analogy applies to Magic. Hopefully you get where I'm going with that. If not, you are a coconut. This is probably a good time to mention that the spell's mana cost is the mana cost of the spell at cast time, and the converted mana cost is the term that they use to refer to the mana cost as it's printed on the card. So if it's in your library, if it's on the battlefield, if it's in your hand, if it's anywhere other than the stack, as far as I recall, I don't think there's any exception to this, it's the converted mana cost that you consider. But while you're casting it, that's the actual mana cost as a spell, because it becomes a spell to go onto the stack, even if it's a creature. Now, one thing I've seen people screw up all the time is they think that once it's out of your hand, you cast it, it's been established because you already know what the value is. Wrong. If you have Endless One in your hand, it has a mana cost of 0. You cast it for, let's say, an X value of 5. So now it's a 5 cost spell. As soon as the spell resolves and hits the battlefield, it is now a 0 cost permanent. So just because you paid 5 for it, and that happened, that is a thing that occurred, it still goes back to being a card with a mana cost of 0, because it doesn't matter what you paid for it. Once it has left the stack, it doesn't matter. So basically, even when you're changing the cost, you're not really changing the cost. Now let's just burn through all the rest of the exceptions, or not really exceptions, just examples and questions I get all the time. A token has a converted mana cost of 0. It's not nothing, it's not blank, it's 0. Like the actual value 0, and 0 is of course considered to be an even number, not just in Magic the Gathering, but in math. So let's say our friend Voidwinnower is on the field, and you can't cast anything even, so you want to blow it up with Murderous Cut, which costs 5 normally. Oh, but you want to delve it down 1 because you only have 4 mana, and you want to exile a card out of your graveyard. Well, now you only paid 4, so the mana cost is 4, right? Wrong. The simplest way I can explain this is to say that delve is an alternative way of paying the cost. The cost doesn't actually change, you're just paying for it. Now, it is important to outline that delve is not an alternative cost, it's an alternative method for paying the cost. Alternative cost means something very specific that I'll get into later. Now, when it comes to like kicker, multi-kicker, strive, escalate, the other 50 nearly identical versions of it, all of those are seen as extra costs to cast the spell, and they're like a static ability of the spell on the stack that you can optionally pay. They don't change the spell's converted mana cost. Oh, and they also don't change its actual cost on the stack either. Like I said, those are two different things. So let's talk about alternative costs, because this is the one that I see people get wrong the most. Now, obviously, if you've got like a 4-cost spell, but it has -2, so you could cast the spell for 2 as an alternative cost, it's still considered to have a converted mana cost of 4 as a card in your library, etc. So they have Voidwinnower on the field, and you got to make sure everything that you cast is actually odd. Now you want to cast a spell that has dash, or has awaken, or has morph. It's the only 3 I can think of, but basically any alternative cost. Apparently the only modifier for a spell on the stack is X. If it's not X, you have to use what's printed on the card no matter what you actually paid for the spell. So although it's literally called an alternative cost, you don't consider the cost that you paid for the alternative cost to be the cost of the spell. That still sounds wrong to me, but a whole bunch of different people on a whole bunch of different websites said that that's how it works. And, you know, God forbid Wizards actually put it in the game's rules. But the good news is I thought of another example, Flashback. And then I cheated. It's Awaken, Bestow, Dash, Emerge, Evoke, Flashback, Madness, Miracle, Overload, Prowl, Surge, and Suspend. And any spell that uses Phyrexian mana as an alternative mana source, your life total to pay for the spell, uses cards in hand to determine it, or the discarding of cards, sacrificing permanents on the battlefield instead of paying the cost, returning a permanent to its owner's hand, tapping permanents on the battlefield, determining the number of cards in the graveyard, the number of cards in the library, anything that references an event, a card, or an action in the future, you know, like Pact of Negation, it refers to future mana, an existence of a permanent on the battlefield check, granting an opponent additional life points, any spell that checks if an opponent has taken a certain action, or a conditional check of anything that happened during the turn. There you have it, every single alternative cost in the entire history of Magic the Gathering. I already regret saying that, somebody's going to correct me. So let me give that person a preemptive shut up, I don't care. I'm just trying to teach people how to measure their spells cost correctly. So hopefully this video helped you guys out. Watch out for more videos in the series because there's honestly a lot of things that people are doing wrong in their daily MTG play. If you have a suggestion or something that just drives you nuts when people get it wrong or do it wrong or completely ruin a game because of it, let me know down in the comment section below and I'll see you guys next video.